Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. This is Gunnar Eos, and we are bringing you another episode of the Logical Gamers Logical Podcast. I'm with the usual crew, and today's topic is going to be realistic graphics versus, let's say, stylized, traditional pixel graphics. Take your pick. Um, we live in a crazy gaming world, right? We've gone from Super Mario World, where it's this 2D plumber jumping on these 2D Goombas and things that Nintendo to this day swore to me are turtles, but they look like weird fucking sea creatures to me. Two games like Last of Us and God of War, the latest reboot of God of War, where you can see every individual beard hair on Kratos' chin and I can see the dewdrops, and we're talking about the sun rays coming through trees. Like we've come a long way in graphics. Now, the reason this topic came up is because I've noticed in different games and reading, going on different websites and looking at the comment sections and just seeing how people are reacting to games that a lot of people nowadays kind of equate hyper realistic graphics with the quality or the enjoyment of the game. And while, yes, I'm of the mindset that if we have the technology, unless it's for a deliberate artistic choice, our game, like the latest Mario game, shouldn't be looking like Super Mario on the Super Nintendo on the NES, not SNES. So I'm of that mindset that if you have the technology to make your game look better, make it look better. But I'm kind of, you know, I have to disagree with some people in the gaming space, their mindset of if this game doesn't look super hyper realistic and I don't see the pecs in 4K Ultra HD, this game is ass. Or why would I want to play a pixel game? What am I fucking in 1900s? Like these are the things that I read, that I see people talk about, and I'm like, no, it's, yeah, games looking nice and seeing your game in 4K is all fine and good, but there is a place for stylized graphics, whether it's, comic book style graphics, pixel style graphics, a la like the first games, the Final Fantasies, the Marios, the Zeldas, that style, to different art styles. Not everything has to be hyper realistic, and not everything, like, having hyper realistic graphics doesn't mean your game is by default superior. Because I have played and seen plenty of games that looked amazing and were trash. I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy 15.
Keep falling
So,
out.
yeah, any opportunity to call out the flaw, and that's being very nice. The flaw that is Final Fantasy 15, I will take said opportunity. So, my stance is your game doesn't have to be hyper realistic. It doesn't have to look great. They don't even have to look humanly proportioned. I'm a fan of all art styles, and graphics do not make a game. So, on that stance, I'd like to hear from the rest of you guys. What do you guys think about hyperrealism? Is it like giving my hyperrealism or get the hell out? Or it's like, we're all open to different art styles. I kind of get what the consensus will be, but let's hear it. Who wants to go first?
All right, so
I'll
I'll
go
go.
first.
I'll go.
Okay. No. Yep.
So I don't think anybody's gonna be surprised uh, that I'm not a graphics guy. So while hyperrealism graphics are appreciated in certain games, and I have a list of games here that I think have like really impressive graphics. Some that I enjoyed, some that I didn't enjoy. Red Dead Redemption 2. That's an amazing looking game, but to me, it's a boring game. So its graphic fidelity did nothing for me personally as far as enjoyment. So Red Dead Redemption 2, Ghost of Tsushima, right? Very good looking game, but that game was fun. So I got more out of it than just, oh, look at the graphics. Like, again, I'm an artist, so I appreciate the work that goes into crafting these 3D models and these textures and these worlds and everything. But it doesn't. It's a tool. It doesn't. It isn't the machine itself. Like, it's just a small part of it. Um, The Last of Us Part Two, right? Like, I'm not a fan of it for a lot of reasons, but it's a good looking game. Like, it's a phenomenal looking game, but it doesn't make the game funner to me personally. Some people out there might, that might make and break the game. Like, if the game looks good, right? And I can understand that, but it's just, I'm not in that camp. Detroit Become Human. I'm not a big narrative guy. I'm not a big graphics guy, but that's a game that I did enjoy. Because it was engaging, the story and like the decision making. Like, it was just a perfect storm. And so, despite me not being like big on narrative or big on graphics, like, I still enjoyed the game very much. Death Stranding, I didn't like that game at all. Great looking game, beautiful graphics, but it didn't do it for me. Like, the graphics and the art style, graphics or the art style, can only make the game that much better. It can only do so much,
Yeah.
if the core gameplay doesn't speak to me. So I'm more for gameplay than graphics, but if I had to compare hyper realistic graphics to like pixelate graphics, or um, a more artistic art style, something like Borderlands, I have to give it to those games, to the stylized games, because I think they age better. If you look at a Super Nintendo game or a Sega Genesis game, those have aged better than PlayStation 1 games. And PlayStation 1 games and Dreamcast games at the time, that was cutting edge technology. That was considered like as realistic as it can get, right? And those games don't look good compared to what's available now. While Super Nintendo games, 16-bit games, they look they, they look fine. Like, they don't hurt my eyes. So I'm more for, if I had to pick like a graphical style that I prefer, you know, the either pixel art or stylized art, whatever you want to categorize it as. I'm more for those games personally.
Okay. Okay.
I definitely agree. I feel like stylized games shows more
Shit.
creativity. Um, it shows more of it. For me, it's like, because I am an artist and therefore art is important to me. And some would say, well, as an artist, I would appreciate the hyper realistic types of graphics, like what Final Fantasy or Square Enix tend to push out on their current games. Um, I appreciate it because of the effort put in by those people working to make it, to bring it to the forefront. However, I still love the style of, say, Ratchet and Clank, that cartoony, big-eyed, big head, oversized hands kinds of art style. I definitely appreciate that because to me, it takes the how can I put it, the sense of realism out of the character and allows the artist to be more creative. Like Ratchet doesn't run the same, he wouldn't have the same run animation as an actual human being would have, right? He would have a more cartoony, um, bounce like running animation, which he does have. Um, and for me, that allows creativity. It allows the game to be more open to different ideas. It allows the game to be more open to um, different avenues and experiments that the developers can take because you have such a unique art style. So whatever you throw in there will fit because they all look the same, or all the assets are of similar style. Now, I give this example before, and I'm going to give it again. While it wasn't a very popular game, I honestly feel like Fuse took a big hit because of the graphical choice that either was forced upon the developers or the developers themselves chose. I'm not really sure. I don't know the backstory behind that too much, but I feel if Fuse went with the original, what Overwatch art style, similar to what Overwatch art style is now, if Fuse had gone with that original art style that was cartoony, that was bright in colors, that was vibrant, it would have, I think, ultimately pushed the game in a different space. So I ignored Fuse for a while, mostly because to me, it initially looked like your normal run and gun type of video game. It didn't really seem to bring much to the table. It was just like, okay, so they put another Call of Duty clone out to try to make money off of what Call of Duty was. That's how I initially thought of Fuse. But then looking at researching the game because I wanted to play a multiplayer with you three, because it was the four of us who did it.
Right.
I found out that the game had a lot more sophistication behind it. How characters worked with each other, how our powers complemented each other. BlankaKong taking on his tank style, putting up shields to defend bullets. Uh, Esoteric coming in with the heavy DPS. You were a healer, gunner, and
Hmm.
I was the infiltrator. I come in, get a couple kills, and then I'm out. Just to make the battle a little bit. I was more like crowd control. The characters complemented each other very well, but the game was so focused on being hyper realistic. To me, it was ugly. That's the way I looked at Fuse. It's a fun game as a video game, but to me, graphically, it's just ugly because they went with this ridiculous hyper style or ridiculous realistic model for these characters that has so much personality. Like when you look at the trailer of the cartoon style of it, the character that the character that Esoteric chose to play with, I think his name was Dao. He was
Oh man, it's
very
been a while. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
um,
I don't remember.
yeah. I think he was very, very, very animated. He was jacked, like screaming at his people, at the enemies while he's shooting them down with his bow. I think it was a bow gun or a rifle or something. He was way out there. But in the trailer, they describe him as being someone who's calm and collected. It fit with that art style. That would not have worked with the hyper realistic graphics that Fuse ultimately went with, or the realistic graphic that Fuse ultimately went with. That's just my opinion on it. That's my example of why I say when you have an art style that's unique, it allows you to do so much more with your characters. You can take a character that looks super serious and make him super silly, and it will fit because of the creative visual design that you chose to go with your overall environment. So for me, I would always pick creative, or unique art style over hyper realistic. I find hyper realistic to be icing on the cake. And for that, the video game itself has to be good overall. Like Blanca said, Ghost of Tsushima is a perfect example because the video game is amazing as a video game. But the icing on the cake was that I got to see motion captions pretty much of actual people because that's what it looked like to me. And I don't have machines with strong graphic capabilities. I mean, I'm still on PS4, while some is on PS5. Well, a lot of people are on PS5. I'm still on PS4. One of my favorite franchises is Pokemon, and we all had that discussion multiple times. Pokemon is horrible graphics. It's
Right.
really shitty graphics. Um, so but I
Horrible
appreciate it.
for the current time. That is.
Yeah, for the current time. But the reason why I can appreciate it is because that is his style, right? So like I can't expect, beautiful people that look like freaking Tifa Lockhart and Cloud Strife throwing Pokeballs to a realistic looking rat with pink or red cheeks. It just, for me, it wouldn't sit right for what Pokemon's art style has developed to be. Um, Now, of course, you can also argue, like, say, The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild has a very cartoony art style, and it's way stronger graphically than Pokemon, say, Arceus, but that's a different topic for a different day. All I'm saying is creativity will always beat hyper realistic for me, because hyper realistic just falls behind the motion caption, and it's like me watching real people run around in this fantasy world, and I just don't find that interesting. And rant, your turn, Esoteric.
Well, I'm pretty sure that this is definitely a unanimous decision because I agree with all three of you guys. That I lean more towards stylized graphics as opposed to, hyper realistic graphics. Um, Now, I don't get me wrong, I do embrace, hyper realistic graphics to some degree, but I kind of feel like in this day and age, people who create games in that particular aesthetic are using it to mask the essence of games, which are the gameplay, how the game functions, what the character does, and so on and so forth. Like, I've played several games that look really good. However, when I'm running into a wall, I'm getting glitched into it, or my hit confirms are not working, or they're not accurate, and things of that nature. Um, I just kind of feel like hyperrealism in most of these games, they're just a mask used to hide the flaws of the actual game. That's just my opinion. I'm sure you guys have witnessed it, as I just stated a few moments ago, just constant glitches. Like the game looks really great. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, too, Wolf made an analogy pertaining to cake. It's pretty much you're having icing on top of the cake, but inside it tastes like shit. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um, like
It's like a well dressed plate. The food tastes bad, but it looks appealing.
Exactly. So you're looking at it like, "Ooh, this looks interesting," because on the surface it looks good, but when you actually get to activating your taste buds, it rejects it. Um, also I feel like these current gen like companies that make hyper realistic games, they're putting all their resources into the modeling, the texturing, the rendering of the game. And it's like all those resources could have better been spent by, play testing, bug detecting, just working on the overall meat and potatoes, which is the gameplay. Um, you know, uh on my Twitch streams, yes, I do play a lot of current gen games, but that doesn't stop me from playing and appreciating the old school games that are on like the Nintendo 64, the Sega Genesis, which Kong said, like, some of these games still hold up and look really well. One of the games that I really appreciated aesthetically, it's not hyper realistic, is Golden Sun. Um, that game has a really nice like architectural aesthetic to it. Um, there are some instances where I do have trouble navigating because some things you can't really see, but based on the time that game came out, and based on the technology, the game still they worked with what they had. It was stylized, it looked good, and it played well as well. And it still holds true to today, in my opinion. Um, Also, there are times where I do go back and play it, you know. And what else was I going to say? Um, in regards to the stylized games, there's a little more creativity there. Like when I think of that, I think of Cuphead. I never played the game, but you can tell that those characters were hand drawn. They were animated frame by frame to pretty much portray whatever move sets that the enemies are doing, whatever move sets that the characters are doing, and so on and so forth. And I appreciate that much more because it takes more work to do that. And as Kong also said, you know, it plays well too. So to summarize what I'm saying, I think I kind of like rambled on. I do appreciate both styles. However, I lean more towards stylized because I feel like they put more essence into the game, such as the core values, pretty much the gameplay, the structure, etc. So yeah, I'm going with stylized.
Well, I also think it's uh with the technology, the latest systems being the PS5 and the Xbox what's
Series
I'm gonna look
X.
like a fake gamer. Series X, there you go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
PCs being, insert
Master Race.
insert fucking beefy graphics card here. So, you can make your thing like NASA powered. I think when it comes to a lot of games, I don't know, I could be wrong, I'm probably offending somebody, but I think we've hit like it the cap at what a game can look like. Like you can only make it so realistic. At this point, the next step is VR. Like I don't know how far you can take it. I think that I look at some of these games like Esoteric streams on a PlayStation 5, and I look at him playing games like Horizon and Returnal and Demon Souls. I'm like, okay, it looks really good, but it doesn't look that much better. Correct me if I'm wrong, Esoteric, but it doesn't look much better than a PlayStation 4. Like I see
It
the loading. Like the loading is far superior to my little fucking rust bucket, but
it really doesn't, to your point. It's not a significant change as opposed to Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64. It's
okay,
just
right.
if you think about it, like if you know programs like Maya or whatnot, where characters and everything is modeled in squares, all it essentially is them subdividing those squares to make it more smooth and crisp and adding more detailed textures to it. That's pretty much what it is. It's either that or it's a bunch of pixels, which are dots that are like closer in proximity to make the games look more crisp. Um, in my opinion, I do agree that I feel that they also peaked in a sense. Like, how much more resolution are you gonna get? Like we have 4K, they're pushing 8K. Like at this moment, for my eyes, it's negligible. Like it doesn't matter to me because at the end of the day, you can make a superb looking sandwich, but if it tastes like shit, it's still going to be a shit sandwich. There are some exceptions to the rules, as you guys mentioned, Ghost of Tsushima, um, which is a phenomenal game. Uh, but I feel like most games that are leaning towards the stylized, you know, section of gaming, I think they're more fruitful. You get more from them, in my opinion.
Eh, I all right. So I want to say this, and I'm not going against what I said earlier. I still prefer stylized graphics over hyper realistic graphics, only because, um, more often than not, uh, the games with like a art style tend to be funner. Tend to be funner. That's not to say that.
Tend to be.
That's not to
Yeah,
say
I
that
agree with
there
that.
aren't
Yeah.
pretty games in this with a pretty art style that are shit, right? Genshin
Oh yeah,
Impact comes to
agreed.
mind, right? Genshin Impact,
Yep.
I think, is a phenomenal looking game and has a lot of potential, but at its core, it is a very shallow game. It does not offer you fruitful content that is rich. It really doesn't. So while hyper realistic graphics tend to be like less fruitful with gameplay, there are definitely games that have like a really nice art style or really like stylized art style that's like that can age well, that aren't good games. Just to be clear,
That's
because
true.
you
Yeah.
know like both can be true. So
Yeah.
and you mentioned, Ghost of Tsushima. That's a great looking game that is also fun. So you know I think the point that I think we're all trying to make here is, um just because a game looks good doesn't mean it is good, right? Like, just to put it in simple terms. So
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I
big time.
agree.
As
Um,
someone who, sorry,
no, go ahead, go ahead.
what I was saying was, as someone who appreciates animation, um, I won't necessarily, yeah, I definitely agree with that. But when I'm looking at the graphics of the game, I'm not ultimately really trying to compare it to the gameplay. It's more so like I'm really watching the animation. And if a lot of times, even with these hyper realistic games, if you're giving me something that's hyper realistic, my mind is the type of mind that takes it to the extreme. So I'm expecting everything done realistically. And obviously, it's a video game, so not everything will be realistic in the sense of animation wise or um, presentation or whatever world that the characters are in. But that's why I appreciate, that's the main reason why I appreciate specific art styles, is because I can, for some reason, my mind thinks of it as like, okay, well, I'll let this go because that could just be the art style that they were going for. That's the style that the developers were going for. So little things, like for instance, there's a scene I saw of Final Fantasy VII, and I'm taking a big hit here because this is Square Enix, Final Fantasy VII. So, there's a scene in Final Fantasy VII where Cloud is talking to Iris, and I think she's trying to show him like to go underground or to go through a tunnel to go back to another area or the area he was trying to get back to. But when she goes into the little tunnel and she's showing him the sewer that he has to go down to to escape, there's like her hair is still flowing. And the way I look at it is there should be less wind going through that tunnel, which means when she was standing up next to him, before crouching down and going under that little arc to show him where he has to go, her hair flowing then made sense because there's more wind, there's more air. Whereas when she went under the tunnel, her head movement, her hair was really flowing. And it's like, okay, well, you gave me this hyper anime-ish realistic style of art, but yet her hair isn't even sitting on her head correctly. So it seemed odd to me. But
Okay.
whereas, right, you like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Am I making sense
yeah.
in what
I'm,
I'm saying?
I think I'm getting what you're saying. Yeah.
So, but if say, let's use, I don't know, like say The Legend of Zelda, for example, right? Does it mean that because of the art style that physics technically should change or science should change? It doesn't necessarily mean science will change, but it allows me to go into a more imaginative mode. So if say Zelda was showing Link the same exact scenario under the same exact setting, and Zelda's hair was flowing even though she's in the little tunnel trying to show him where to go, it wouldn't register to me as it's being physically incorrect or scientifically incorrect because they already don't look physically correct or scientifically correct. She has ears that's like 10 inches away from her head. Like, like for me, it's just like, okay, well, I'm now in full imaginative mode. That's my cognitive thinking. When I play games that are hyper stylized versus games that are realistic, it's gonna put me in a sense of where it's like, well, that's actually not animated correctly, or that looks a little weird because you're trying to be super realistic, and the same scenario can happen for a game that's like freaking Jack and Daxter, and I would let it go because it's a raccoon with a staff.
It's easier
Like,
to suspend your disbelief.
to digest. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
You know,
I
so
get you.
So with stylized games or animation, pretty much you give it more leeway because it kind of diminishes the realm of, so to speak, realism. It's more, I guess you can say, abstract. Um,
yeah, because some people
Sort
can
of.
argue with
to
me and
some
say, like,
to some degree,
some,
because you can
some,
still, like, abstract is usually used as a term for like interpreting something that is kind of, I guess, difficult to interpret within the art field. Um, but I guess like there's a little more leeway with stylized um art as opposed to like the realm that we live in where games are looking to aspire to that pinnacle of realism where you cannot help but look at every single like flaw of what it's doing because it's closer to realism. I think it's, I think you can kind of equate that to drawing too. Like if you're drawing like channel 13 figures with just circles and squares and how their movements are, you're like, well, okay, well, it's super stylized. But if you're drawing um a actual picture of someone, you might have the hand right, but if the arm is looking misplaced, people are going to notice that. People are going to see that. So I guess that's what the point you was
mhm.
trying to convey with your
Yeah,
example.
it's with creative art styles, like I expect disproportionate body parts. I expect, like, for instance, let's use Overwatch. Overwatch has a pretty crazy art style to it. It has a pretty unique art style to it. And if you look at, say, the guy who's like dressed up like a pig or something like that, right? If you look at his character model, his arms and hands are pretty big. Like his one hand could cover his big belly in front of him, which is very off when he's standing next to, say, Soldier 76, who's a properly proportionate character, ideally speaking. But even though their proportion is so different, because they follow the same art style, they work hand in hand. Like you can tell, okay, well, these two characters fit in the same world, in the same environment, right? Now,
Mm.
if I took him and I put him next to freaking, um, like Returnal, who has a very realistic art style to it, if I put him next to the main character in Returnal, clearly you're gonna see that, okay, this shit don't work. This is not gonna work. This looks bad because I'm comparing a highly stylized character to a realistic character. But Soldier 76 is realistically proportioned, but he follows the same art style as that other character. So it fits. Is
There's something jarring about it. It's like the best example I could think of. If you ever seen the original Space Jam movie and seeing Bugs Bunny next to Michael Jordan, it's just like,
mm-hmm,
what the fuck? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But if you watch a Bugs Bunny cartoon, in his world, it's like, okay. Or you watch Michael Jordan in a basketball game or in an interview, it's like, okay. Like the
mm-hmm.
expectations are set, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is real, right? Or this is a cartoon, right? When uh like with your Final Fantasy 7 example, right? The expectation is, yeah, this is a fantasy world and this isn't real, but it's real. It's closer to real than it isn't. So when it
Mm-hmm.
starts to break those rules, it confuses you and it takes you out of out of your immersion, because it's like, well, that
Right,
doesn't make sense, right? So
right.
am I getting kind of like what you're?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everybody is getting my sense. So, but I was worried about not people not understanding. They are understanding. So at least I'm happy with that.
Yeah, like blah, blah, blah. Stylized art is more prone to exaggeration and more forgiving when it comes to that aspect as opposed to realism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And I
but
think that
I
no,
affects
think
the gameplay too. But go ahead, Gunnar. I knew you were gonna say something.
no, I was just gonna say, like, I think in modern gaming and gaming in 2022, when access to all this technology, right? If you as a game developer and your team decide, okay, we're gonna make our game stylized. The thing that's popping into my head now is an RPG that I played a while ago, but I still like, and I recently bought for the Switch. Was it? I look like an idiot. Um, well, we'll use a different example because the name escapes me.
Must
Uh,
be a great game.
Yeah, I want to say Shanti, but that's incorrect. But it's the same type of world. It's like very Indian and very like that center of the world, very like Asian Indian. But yeah, I look like an idiot, but it escapes me, so I'll just move on. Cuphead, for example, for another example, that's stylized. Like it's obviously meant to portray cartoons and comics from from like the late 30s to early 40s, from that time period. So that art is stylized around that. But because we're gaming in the modern day, we can still make our stylized art conform to standards that the gaming industry has set. So Wolf talked about 7, original 7, and that's a really good example because for the longest time when I first played that game until I was old enough to realize it, I thought Aerith was wearing pants because they were just at a period in time where they couldn't do skirts. Right? This is like 7 is kind of in that bracket of games that came from pixel art style, 2D art style to the new thing that was 3D at the time. And
mhm,
so for the longest time, I thought that chick was wearing pants. Like it blew my mind when I found out that's actually a skirt, or it's supposed to be like a dress. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, okay, those look like fucking MC Hammer pants to me, but whatever you say, Square Enix. But like, if you take a game like that and put it in the 21st century, it could be stylized, but because of modern technology and standards, I can now tell that's a skirt. Like Wolf was talking about the hair, if it's a stylized game nowadays, even if it's stylized and not hyper realistic, I can still tell that that's hair and that her hair still conforms to some level of gravity. So
mhm,
I think stylized games, they have the advantage of still having access to the technology and the tools that the big, hyper realistic 4K, HDR on games also have access to. But to me, it just makes the stylized graphics pop even more. Like two more quick examples are Octopath Traveler and at the time of this recording, the recently released Triangle Strategy. Two different development teams, but they kind of adopted the same style. This new, more so Octopath than Triangle, this new what they call 2.5D, where it's not 2D, it's not 3D, it's in the middle. So the backgrounds kind of pop a little bit and they conform to 3D norms. So when you go around a tree, the tree looks 3D, but the character and NPCs are 2D.
Yeah.
That's
Similar
only
to Disgaea, I believe.
right, right. Even though now Disgaea 6 has kind of gone full 3D, but like 4, 5 and down, you're right. That's exactly what it is. Um, So I think like that makes stylized games way more interesting than hyper realistic games because they can now use technology to make weird perspectives like that just make a game
work.
that could have been, yeah, work. Like it could have been just a flat surface. They could have made Octopath and Triangle just like Final Fantasy 1, where it's 2D plane, 2D characters, but no, we have access to this technology, so now we can make it this weird 2.5D that to me personally makes that game stylistically and artistically way more interesting than booting up God of War and seeing Kratos in like 4K. To me anyway, because like you're taking a limitation that you set on yourself when you decided to make your game look like this, and you're going, what can we do to make it look different even though it's 2D? And that's why I kind of go with stylized games like Octopath and Triangle and Cuphead. Like they're stylized art styles, but because they have access to this technology, it it comes out looking way different than a lot of the big budget hyper realistic games that are on the market currently.
No, that I would say that makes a lot of sense. You know, when creating stylized types of games or like having a stylized art style, it's I would assume it's rather difficult to kind of mold it into a box of common games. Like, how can we make our stylized characters and game look as good as a hyper realistic game like add some of those components of realism to it? Like, one of the games that are really stylized and it looks really amazing to me and appealing is I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it's called Ari. It has two games.
But yeah, Ari, I played Ari in the Blind Forest. I think that's the first one.
Yes, that's the
Yeah.
first one. And they not only do they play really well, but they are phenomenal aesthetically. You also have Hollow Knight. Like Hollow Knight, I'm not too sure if it's hand drawn or if it's 3D, but if it is 3D, they definitely shaded it in a sense to make it look like it was animated through and through, hand drawn. And it looks really good. The color scheme is amazing. The characters look super stylized. Um, and what they do really effectively that a lot of stylized games do is they create a 2D looking character, as you know, gonna kind of said, and have them in this 3D atmosphere. You know, the background looks 3D. Everything looks well rendered, but everything in the foreground, the character, the platforms that they stand on, the stuff that they push around and interact with, the enemies, they all look super stylized and hand drawn. So to take, your stylized creation and kind of push it to the realm of what a good looking graphic wise game is, it's very it's a great feat.
I said it in the beginning, and so I'm going to just reiterate it. I think Ratchet and Clank is whatever Ratchet and Clank that's on the PS5 now is the best looking PS5 game. Um, one of the best looking PS5 games. I'm not going to say the best, that's pushing it. But I would say it's one of the best looking PS5 games because not only is it graphically strong, in my personal opinion, maybe I'm wrong about it. You have those tech graphic, those deep graphic guys. I can say, okay, well, it's this pixel off, or
Right.
if you look right, like those guys, I can't compete with if they can come up with proof that it's not a great graphical game. But to me, it is very pretty. It is very vibrant, and it only adds to the immersion of the world. But that's what I feel like graphics should be. It should be an addition to the overall experience. It shouldn't be the experience.
Right.
And a lot of people online, a lot of people that I've seen or comments that I've read about recent video games that's come out, they make it seem as if graphics is the only experience, which again, in turn, Blanca kind of hinted to it when he made a little comment. He said sometimes it can graphics can affect gameplay. This is where, in my vision, it can affect gameplay if more and more consumers only really care about the graphics of the game and say that is their ultimate experience, what does that put developers in the situation of, well, we can throw together some, you know, piece of shit and put something pretty, make it pretty, people will buy. That to me will ultimately affect the quality of video games because it's still called a video game, something you play, it's something you interact with. At that point, you might as well watch a Pixar Disney movie,
Right.
you know. So it's like, that's another concern that comes into play for me, where the heavy graphics or perfection in graphics can really ultimately affect the video games, where we're just not going to get, because they invested so much time on this, we're not going to get much time on that, on something else that ultimately makes the game. But I love the way Ratchet and Clank looks on PS5. I love it. It's not the perfect video game in terms of gameplay, but the fact that it's stylized, like Esoteric said, but also graphically strong in terms of, I guess, its pixels and its frame counts and all that other stuff. It's a very beautiful game, in my opinion. So that's a perfect example of something that's like, okay, well, this is the style that we have, and this is the standard that we set for ourselves, or this is the standard of the gaming industry. Let's meet that standard with our unique art style.
That's all true, but guys like us are gonna have to come to terms with the reality of the gaming industry, or the gaming community has expanded, and it is very different now. It is not what it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There are people out there who do value hyper realistic graphics very highly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those people, obviously, but they're out there, where I remember watching gameplay videos of The Last of Us, the first one, and people, the player, right, person who I was watching playing the game, were so enthralled by the story and like the graphics that they would get annoyed when there was a gameplay segment, right? And they'd be like, "Oh God,
Wow.
I gotta get
Wow.
through this part to see the rest of the story."
That's interesting.
So it's funny,
Wow.
like, because I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum, where for me it's like, oh, a cutscene, like I want to get back to the game,
Yeah.
right? But they're on the other
Yesterday.
side. They're like, oh God, I gotta like kill these zombies to like see what happens next in the story. So like, there's a market for that, and you bring up Ratchet and Clank for PS5, which I think is a beautiful looking game, and I haven't played it yet personally, but it looks fun as hell, right? But when you compare that to maybe, I don't know, something else on PS5, right? Its sales probably pale in comparison, because people see Ratchet and Clank and they think, oh, that's just a PS2 game, upscaled to a PS5 game. It's not a true, air quotes, true PS5 experience. And I think that's, that's just kind of how things have changed. If you look at something like the Red Dead Redemption games, right? If you play,
Did we lose Kong?
say again.
No, I hear him.
Do you hear me? I'm still live.
Okay, I hear you now.
Okay,
I think there was a
weird.
little
Was
hiccup there.
All good. So if you compare, and that was what I was going to mention before, hyper realistic graphics do affect gameplay, and this is my example of that. Red Dead Redemption 1. If you played Red Dead Redemption 1 and then you went to play Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a huge difference in gameplay flow. So because Red Dead Redemption 2 is so hyper realistic, everything about it is as close to reality as possible. To me, it is a less fun experience, because if I'm looting something, right, the character has a really realistic animation of rummaging through someone's pockets or going through like drawers or whatever, versus Red Dead Redemption 1, where I'm just looting a drawer or whatever, or a character, and it's just like 2 seconds. It's like loot done, right? To me, it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
like one is
Time
very
consuming.
video gamey, and one is trying to be like this realistic experience. For me, that's annoying. Like it's like, ugh, just get to it. You know, I just want to get back to the game. But for some people, they value that realistic animation more than just getting back to the game, because for them it's not about the gameplay, it's about the experience. Like it's two different things now. Before, during our time, the experience was the gameplay. Now the experience is the
The
story and the
experience, yeah.
graphics, and it's more of like
How it
a
looks.
cinematic thing than it is an interactive thing. um the other example I was gonna bring up was Grand Theft Auto games. So if you compare Grand Theft Auto 5 to Grand Theft Auto Vice City, right? The games have like the same formula, right? In terms of like you do missions, you're in a sandbox game, you can kind of do whatever you want. But because Grand Theft Auto 5 leans more to like a more realistic experience, it kind of puts itself in a box where there are certain goofy things that used to be in Grand Theft Auto that they can't really do anymore because it doesn't quite make sense with this new like direction. So,
That makes sense.
Grand Theft Auto 5 is still super goofy, right? Because it's still a 2013 game. So if Grand Theft Auto 5 came out now, it would be radically different. Red Dead Redemption 2 would be more in line to what a Grand Theft Auto 5 would have been had that game come out now or in like recent years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that just goes back to my point about, again, we are, you bring up that point that us four are definitely the minority camp, definitely now more so than before.
Yeah.
Like I keep hearing like, oh man, every time I see something for a new upcoming game, it's like, oh man, this game looks so good. The graphics are so amazing. Or, oh, this shit looks like a N64 game. This looks like a PlayStation game. And it's just like, it's always the two extremes.
Yeah.
Either it looks like this cinematic masterpiece, or they bash it so hard that it's it's one step above caveman drawings. But I think, and I know we bring this up in a lot of topics, we're fortunate that the space is still big enough that we can kind of just like, okay, you know what? Maybe the franchise that I grew up with, it's taken a direction that's not for me. Let me go check out what these other guys in this other sphere, indie sphere, are doing. Oh,
Mhm.
okay, that's a pretty dope looking pixel game you got there. I'll give you my money. So it's just like with a lot of things, whether it's gameplay, messaging, graphics, console, it's we're fortunate enough that we
We
are
have
in a
options.
time period, yeah, where we have options. Like you can have your hyper realistic game. I hope you enjoy it. Hope it does well for your sake. I'm gonna go over here. So fortunately, we're not stuck um dealing with a certain, you know, gaming sphere that we're not interested in anymore.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And to add to this, I feel like people who are super like gung ho about hyper realistic graphics, it's very disappointing because of the fact that when a new game comes out, they're not they don't appreciate the older games. Like I've had conversations with my brother where there's a game that I would want him to play, but he refuses to play it because it's not graphically as enhanced as the PS5 games are. And it's like you're missing out on so much content, so much enjoyment just by
What's an example? I'm curious.
hmm, what's an example? What was an example? I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was God of War. I think it was God of War 3 or something because he was playing God of War 4. And I told him, hey, you should play, 3. 3, I guess, was okay since you like God of War or whatever. And his reasoning wasn't because the gameplay sucks or whatever. It was because like the graphics, you know. or if he would see me play like something on a PS3, like Heavenly Sword, for example, he's not going to play it because it's not up to date graphics. And it's like, it really sucks and it's disappointing that, you're taking that angle when it comes to video games, because you're missing out on a lot of enjoyable games just because they don't look pretty to you. And
Well,
to me,
that's
it just
again, that
sucks.
goes
I mean,
back to
that's
what
his
I
preference, but
yeah, exactly. Like different people enjoy things differently, and
yeah,
so we kind of have to accept it. I don't like it either. I think it's I think it's silly, but that's the way it is. That's what happens when something grows and expands. And now the gaming hobby has grown tenfold compared to when we were younger. We're talking PS2 days or PS1 days compared to now. It's a whole different monster in terms
yeah,
of size and reach. Like it's huge,
Yeah.
man. The gaming industry has I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is bigger than the movie industry, which is incredible to think about. I never thought that was possible. So,
I mean,
I-
I don't doubt it. Yeah.
yeah,
but
same.
yeah, I think that I'm pretty much. I think we've kind of
Yeah,
exhausted
I've expressed my I've
this
expressed my.
topic. So, Esoteric, take us home.
All right, guys. Well, this concludes our podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is Logical Gamers TV. Also, Kong and myself stream. Kong streams on Sundays. The time it varies. It's very tentative. So be sure to follow him and tune in for a notification. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the both of us. So feel free to follow. Also, as for our socials, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. That's Logical Gamers TV. Look for the light bulb icon. And we're also on Discord and TikTok. So you can definitely check us out there. Once again, Logical Gamers TV. Look for the light bulb icon and you're there.
All right, guys. Thanks for a great conversation. Catch you in the next one.